Someone's Mother by Joan Murray is an interesting piece of narration in which we are confronted with the problem of aging, the problem of honesty, the problem of character, the problem of ethics and the right thing to do. All of these things are sort of thrown right at us as readers in a actually very small amount of words. And I think it's really interesting how this piece dives right in. It doesn't even waste any time. Hitchhiking is generally illegal where I live in upstate New York, but it's not unusual to see someone along Route 20 with an outstretched thumb. That whole sort of situation. But then, of course, it leads from directly into that to the greater issue of who exactly is the hitchhiker who our narrator confronts. And that it says, I was doing 60, eager to get home after a dental appointment in Albany, and I was a mile past the hitchhiker before something made me turn back. I couldn't say if the hitchhiker was a man or a woman. All I knew was that the hitchhiker was old. And that's what gets us directly in. And from there, we get we get dialogue, we get some connection, like, are you going to there to shop? No, I live there. What are you doing here? I asked with a tone I hadn't used since my son was a teenager. I was out for a walk. And that's one thing that's really interesting about this piece, is the sort of reversal of roles, right? Because what you get is a younger person, the narrator, sort of speaking to the older person as a child, right? Like, what are you doing out here? Oh, are you sure you should be out here? Like that sort of like, almost a motherly, like chastising, like older person role, but in fact, it's the elderly person who's being talked to in this manner. Of course, the woman admits later to being 92 years old and saying that the reason that she wants to be picked up hitchhiking and doesn't want to be taken anywhere else is if my son finds out, he'll put me in a home. And this, of course, brings us to this whole entire massive issue of what on earth are we supposed to do in a situation like this? This old woman clearly doesn't really know where she is. She admits that she doesn't know she says, I don't know where I live, she said in the tiniest voice, but someone will come along who knows me. They always do. So she's suffering from, some sort of dementia situation, memory loss situation, all of this. But if the narrator does the right thing and brings this woman to the attention of her son, then she's going to be put in a home, this place that is not necessarily pleasant, which the narrator seems to feel guilty about for having put her own parent in a home. So it brings up this whole entire issue of what do you do in this situation? Like, sure, it might be safer for the elderly person to be put in assisted living or something of the sort, but is that necessarily the right thing to do for that person? So it raises all of these issues. Another thing that's interesting is how in this piece the narrator actually ends up sort of being the villain of the piece, right? Like, as we drove, I kept thinking about my mother, watched over and cared for in a bright, clean place. I also thought about her empty bird feeders, her azaleas blooming for no one, the way she whispers on the phone, I don't know anyone here. So it really, drives home this sort of emotional center. And it raises all sorts of questions, like, what will the narrator do? Like, what should the narrator do? Who is this old woman? What is the right thing to do? What would you do personally? And this sort of narration of walking us through the story raises all of these issues. And then at the end, it says, promise me you'll tell the druggist if no one comes soon, I said to her with great seriousness. Again, playing the parent, right? I promise, she said with a cheerful little wave. And the end of this, one thing that makes this narration interesting is that it gives you something to consider or interpret. It doesn't necessarily just close down at the end. It sort of opens up. It gives you something to think about. It makes you sort of question your own decisions. It makes you question your own behavior. And in that, it becomes more interesting than just a story of somebody picking up a lady on the side of the road.